Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Dungeon Dive, we're going to do a follow-up video to Forbidden Psalm, miniature gaming at the end of the world. The miniatures standalone game and also a supplement for Morkborg. So let's first take a look at my warband that I created. And my warband's name was, of course, Savannah and the Ragged Tigers. And Savannah here is my leader. She has this following stats: agility -2, presence +2, strength +2, -1 toughness. She is armed with that's some kind of like morning star there. And she is scared of monsters, so she gets a -1 attack to all monsters, which is a terrible flaw to have in Morkborg. And she also has a feat called Mind Over Matter. And every time she takes damage from an attack, if she successfully passes a presence test, she can ignore D4 damage. That's really handy for my leader to have there. Coming up next is Risen, the Forgiven. And man, this is such a perfect standee for this for the style of this game. Just look at that guy. He looks straight out of Morkborg or Forbidden Psalm. Really, really cool standee. I love that guy. He has a 0 agility, a -3 presence. He just has this big two-handed F-off weapon, so I gave him a strength +3 and a toughness +1. I said this is a great sword. There isn't a great sword in the book, but I use the stats for the great axe, which means on a critical, I can break a shield, and it does D10 damage. He is angry, so he's always kind of wanting to move towards enemies and attack them. And he also has a revolting appearance, so enemies are at a -1 to attack him. He almost died. I ended my last scenario with only 2 HP left on Risen, the Forgiven. Next up is Moonstar the Juhilis, and she is this kind of druid character here. There are her stats there: +2, -2, +4. She's a meathead druid. And she got a big bonus to her strength and a big penalty to her presence. So she actually hits like a tank. That is pretty cool. But she also had a -2 to her toughness. She ended up at the last scenario with only 4 HP left. When she takes damage, she takes 1 additional hit. And she is just armed with this staff there. And she also has some bandages and a healing potion. And then coming up is my ranged character, and this is Hooffoot the No Crumpet. There are his stats there: +2, +2, -2, -1. He is, of course, armed with a bow. He took 3 shots in this last scenario and missed all of them. He is weak, so he has 1 less HP. He never took damage. He stayed at 6 HP the whole game. And his feats are claws, so he is always armed with his claws. His claws are an agility attack, and they do D6 damage, so he is never at a loss for having a cool melee weapon. And then finally, we have our Warband's sorcerer here, our magic user, and that is Kalmok the Pew Pew. He's got a +1, +2, -2, -1. He is also armed with a dagger. He was also weak, so -1 HP, and he has bark skin, so he has a natural +1 armor, which is really nice, but that also gave him a -1 to his agility. He was originally armed with the Doom Scroll and the Hope's Last Breath healing spell, but during this adventure, I found a Flaming Hand scroll, so I went ahead and swapped that out. One rule I'm not clear on, maybe somebody can clear it up for me, is magic. I'm not sure if you can only ever have 2 scrolls equipped or if you always have access to all of your scrolls. But he did very poorly on all of his spell casting in this first scenario, and he ended up with 2 tragedies. So what tragedies are is every time you fail to roll on to cast a spell, you end up with a tragedy. And then when you fumble, when you roll a 1, when you critically miss casting a spell, you roll on the calamity table and you add the number of tragedies. And as the numbers get higher, the worse things happen to you. So you don't want a lot of tragedies. And unfortunately, he received 2 of those on his first mission. So the first mission we went on the first mission here in the core book. And of course, we are working for Riprix, this mad sorcerer. And this is my little standee I'm using to represent Riprix here. I thought that was a pretty cool looking standee for Riprix. Kind of looks like just kind of a nasty little rat-faced little dude there. But our first mission here was the Mad Wizard's Tea. And Riprix does indeed have work for you. Not far from his castle, you will find the ruins of an old house. Once vast, it spoke of its owners' wealth and prestige, but they have been long dead. Riprix informs you that the task is quite straightforward. He wishes for you to get him some fungi he needs from these ruins. The mold only grows on corpses. So I took that and ran with it because I didn't want to use an old manor, ruins of an old manor. So the battle mat I set up was more like a cemetery leading into some sewers. And I used these dead body tokens that I had. I believe these are from Pathfinder Pawns, from some of the dungeon dressing set. And so I scattered these about some of the various caskets here and grave sites. And those were what I was trying to find the black spotted fungus in. And I ended up, at the end of that game, I ended up finding 3 pieces of fungus, so I can sell those back to Riprix. I also killed 2 ghouls, and so these ghouls will give me some XP. And so at the end of a scenario, you go back to the end of towards the end of the campaign section in the core book, has all of your rules about what you do when you survive a scenario. So if each warband with at least 1 standing member gets paid 10 gold for taking part, so I would get that 10 gold. You would do any death save throws. So none of my warband died, so I don't need to worry about any saving throws or rolling on any injuries. Next, you can sell your items. So I would sell that black spotted fungus, and then you would gain experience points. So I would gain an experience points for each monster I killed, each treasure I collected. Scenarios with at least 1 member surviving get 1 XP. Models you down. Models would be other warbands if you were playing competitively. If you passed any death saves, and you also get an XP for anybody who died. So even when you lose, you still get some XP. So I will go through that and I will total up the XP and the gold off camera. But what I really wanted to focus on today are some of the ways that the Loc battlemats can suggest narrative. And this is a pretty interesting setup for that. So I wanted to show that here. So in this setup I have this kind of sewer area, and it is coming up into a cemetery here. And these walls here, I said, were high walls, and they were marking off a room. And so I am saying that this room here is where Riprix lives. And I have set up his little hovel there. He's got a bed. He has a little workbench that he's working on, a cabinet full of weird curiosities, a couple doors leading out, and he's got some undead in some cages here. Maybe he's been doing some experiments on the undead. And so this is where we have come back after successfully finding his black spotted fungus. We have come back, and Savannah is taking the fungus to Riprix in order to sell that back and in order to discover any other missions that he might have for us. While she is doing that, the rest of my warband is over here, leaning against this short pony wall, this little 4-foot wall that's blocking off the sewer. You know, they're kind of very coolly leaning against this wall, maybe smoking some slag weed, drinking some snot whiskey or something, and just being really cool, probably spitting on the floor, probably making nasty comments on other scum that walk by. So that's kind of the scenario now, what's happening. But if you take a look at the battle mat, at the way I had it, I combined it, is we have 3 distinct exits. So if we go from this sewer area here and we go through this kind of natural tunnel, we have an exit there. If we come down to the south here into the cemetery, we have some stairs going down. And then over here, we also have an entrance into what is probably some kind of mausoleum or a crypt or something over here. So that gives us three different possibilities of where we could go. And this is a really good example of how you can incorporate role playing into Forbidden Psalm. You can incorporate your games of Morkborg into this. So now I'm saying we have three different scenarios that we can choose from depending on which of the three exits we want to explore. So if we go to this natural cave over here, that is going to lead to scenario 2 in the book. And scenario 2 is pits the Warband against these animal cultists. And these animal cultists are trying to perform a ritual to bring forth the end of the world. And so I'm saying that particular scenario takes place inside some kind of a more natural cavern. And so if I want to explore that scenario, then I can choose that path there. I'm saying that this crypt path here, that leads to scenario 7. And scenario 7 is called Mort Safe. And this is the dead are revolting. So that works perfectly. It's in a cemetery. And we have to go down into these stairs, into the dungeon that exists underneath the cemetery. And we have to use this item called Mort Safe on a crypt in order to stop the undead from rising. Well, what I was thinking about this, though, is because this is more like a dungeon crawl scenario, that I would, when I chose this mission, when I chose to explore this exit, then I would turn to Morkborg and Solitary Defilement. And I would use the dungeon crawling rules for Solitary Defilement. And I would play this scenario as a pen and paper dungeon crawl, not as a skirmish game. So I have set up my dungeon crawl map according to the Solitary Defilement rules, or my crawl sheet, I should say. I have assigned that dungeon with a difficulty rating of 6, which means that it's pretty easy to locate the special rooms that I am looking for. And in Solitary Defilement, when you are dungeon crawling, you complete the dungeon when you have discovered your 4th special room. The harder it is to explore, the harder it is to find those special rooms, the longer the dungeon ends up being. So this dungeon name is called the Cemetery Depths. Its status is it is infested with the undead and worms. Imminent danger is infection. The entrance is the stairs in the cemetery, and it's guarded by a corpse collector. So I have come up with 4 special rooms. The first special room is just 2 skeletons guarding a treasure. The second special room is a rotten floor which crumbles under our feet, and half of the warband must pass agility checks or take D4 damage. We have the third special room is 2 ghouls and a tapeworm crawl out of a fetid pond or puddle, and we have to fight them. And then the fourth special room will be where the master crypt is, where we have to use our MacGuffin on that master crypt. But that is being guarded by a corpse collector. And the corpse collector is a pretty powerful enemy that we will probably have to distract and do a little bit of role playing to avoid. And I have pulled out all 4 of those cards. So when I do that dungeon crawl, I have all of my bestiary stats here. This card deck is indispensable. I want a card deck like this that has every single monster made for Morkborg. Please, somebody make more bestiary decks like this for this game. These are so handy just to have out. And even these cards can suggest a narrative. You could draw 3 or so different bestiary cards and put together a narrative. But here we have our corpse collector. And then some of the other enemies that we might discover in that dungeon would be skeletons, tapeworm terrors, and disemboweled ghouls. So that's one way that I would kind of combine Morkborg and Solitary Defilement, or Forbidden Psalm, is by translating some of the scenarios here into more solo RPG style games using Solitary Defilement. And then finally, we have this exit here, which leads into a mausoleum, and that would be scenario 5 here, which is I am the real Verprix, which is you have to go and you have to find a necromancer. So I figured a mausoleum type environment would be a perfect place to find a necromancer. I also placed in my original scenario, I also placed these 2 doors here because this expansion, Rotten Bits, it adds some elements for when you open doors, some random things that can come pouring out. And I completely forgot I had those little doors. And those little doors are from this set here, the Master's Relics World Crafting Tokens. And this is a really cool little box of just neat little tokens that you can use to lay down on your battle mats. And it comes with all kinds of things like different kind of dungeon furnishing, different kinds of traps and relics and runes, architecture and landscaping and doors and shrubs and little ponds of water, little puddles of water. But I really did like that. So in looking at your environment that you are playing, you can develop a story. You can start connecting the dots on the table. And in doing so, you can create branching narrative paths. So you could take all of your scenarios that you have for Forbidden Psalms, and you could start constructing branching paths so it's not just a linear game. And depending on the way the paths connect, then that might inform you that maybe you need to go on a longer travel. And then if you have to go on a longer travel, you could use the travel rules from Solitary Defilement. You could use the overland rules from Feretory. And you could always come back to a central location, which would act kind of like a hub. And this would be our hub here at Verprix layer here, close to the sewers. And I would keep track of the battle mats that I am using, the pages. So this is 31 and 32 and 37 and 38. And so this is my hub. But yeah, I was looking at these battle mats and I saw those 3 distinct exits. And I was just, yeah, that is perfect. That is a perfect way to modify your game, to make your game more personal, to be inspired by the stuff that is on your table. One last thing I did want to talk about briefly is last night I got kind of in an artistic mood and I was thinking about making my own paper minis. I'm not sure if I'm going to follow through with this because it could end up being a lot of work and I already have a ton of Pathfinder stuff, but because the world of Morkborg and Forbidden Psalm is so weird and so gross and so grotesque, some of the art is super great. Some of it is great, but also super amateur. It's a game that I think does inspire and invite people of all artistic levels to add their own vision to. And so I started coming up with some of my own little paper minis to use. And I was inspired by the paper minis in the back of Forbidden Psalm, how they aren't all just the full figure. Some of them are torsos, some of them are just heads, some of them are cut off in weird ways. So you don't need to draw a full body. And I just started coming up with weird designs. So I was thinking this could be a character there, just this head there. I drew this other kind of grotesque head. This is Big Boy here. I'm not sure what his story is or her story. It could be this guy's head with a weird kind of spiked helmet. This could definitely be some kind of a wizard or magic user. And then maybe we have over here this weird kind of oblong head. And just having this guy stand up in one of these standees, this giant head just kind of roaming around the battlefield. It's kind of weird and odd, and I like it. So they do make standees for paper minis. And they are a lot like the standees for cardboard minis, but the slot is thinner and it's curved, slightly curved. And so when you take your paper mini, you kind of give it a little bend and the pressure keeps it in. And because it's slightly curved, it keeps them standing up. And these I just did on index cards, on pretty thick index cards. But then I also have these guys here, which I was thinking these guys could be some kind of like group of zombies or something. And they kind of look like an old, I don't know, they reminded me of an old 60s psychedelic rock band or something. The Gravedigger 5. Was that the Gravedigger 5? Was that the name of that band? Can't remember. Some band that uses an organ. But yeah, so I just kind of like started drawing all of these paper minis, and that's a lot of fun. These took me hardly any time at all. As you can see, I'm not a great artist. I don't have a lot of detail, but I've always really enjoyed drawing without a lot of planning. Just taking a big old fat Sharpie, big old fat Sir Marks-a-Lot, a big old fat Sharpie, and just kind of holding it like a little kid, and just kind of like getting in there and getting grimy with it. And the world of Morkborg, just it supports that kind of art so well that these kind of look like official Morkborg drawings in some ways. Probably not as good as most of the official Morkborg art, but you get the point. But anyways, all right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this follow-up to Forbidden Psalm, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.